most men, the thing that they can articulate the most is anger. And I think if you're angry all the time, there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear and stuff there. So yeah, anger and fear and things like that, I think are emotions that we're wary of. But there's just so many other things that when you begin to unpack yourself, you like, okay, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed because I expected more from myself. I expected more from my father. I expected more from my mom. I expected, more from my partner. You know what I mean? I want more from my kids. And so,
Fellas, how you doing today?
Blessed and grateful, bro.
Man, I appreciate y'all jumping on to have this conversation today, specifically around Black men's mental health. As we were talking off air, man, I think this is a conversation that is starting to become more common, but I think hearing from four men who are in the mental health space, specifically around marriage and family therapy, where we have a systemic lens on mental health issues and how they come up in most of our relationships. So to kick off this conversation, it's important to start this conversation off with just talking about anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. So we're going to start over with Nelson. And Nelson, how do you think societal expectations and stereotypes impact the mental health of Black men, particularly in terms of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation?
yeah, I think that's a great place to start, especially for me, because even with my own kind of struggles and experiences with mental health, I really didn't know much about therapy. I didn't know anybody who had gone into therapy. And for me personally, there was always kind of a stigma coming from my background, my mother being Caribbean and my father being from here, from the Bay Area. So it really wasn't something that you kind of talked about. And so when it came to anxiety and depression, especially, it was kind of like you put your head down and you barrel through it. So for me, what got me into this space obviously started with psychology and things like that. But as a therapist, I really wanted to be the therapist that I wasn't seeing. I felt like attending therapy in the past, there just were certain topics and things that it didn't feel like the therapist was relatable. And, I compared therapist to dating. You're not supposed to like everyone, but I found that was a struggle for myself. So when I kind of figured out this field, marriage and family therapy, I wanted to be the therapist that I didn't see out there. I wanted to be relatable. And so what I see now with clients, especially Black men, is they're so grateful. They already want to dap me up before we get in the room. I'm like, brother, I ain't even did nothing yet. So, taking all of that into consideration, I think being relatable is important because all these societal expectations, especially when it comes to Black masculinity, we don't talk about when we have bad days. I think anger is a hot button topic, but we don't talk about the sadness. We don't talk about the loneliness. We don't talk about the pressure. I think, you want to be a provider, you want to do certain things. And if that's not your roadmap or, you fall straight to that, then, a lot of brothers get discouraged. And that's not something most men feel comfortable talking to their partner about, talking to their kids about, is that I'm not good. We hear constantly that we have to be strong, and that strength is costly. So I think providing that space for Black men to come in and talk about these things, how, I don't know if I got it today. That makes me anxious. I haven't been able to be the man, or for some of them, I'm just like my father. And it's like, how you feel about that? And, it makes me sad because, he didn't have a relationship with me, or, he wasn't good to my mother and things like that. And so ultimately, I think it falls to that taboo topic of suicidal ideation. Because if you're strong to that, for a lot of people, that feels like the ultimate failure, is quitting, feeling like I don't want to be here anymore, or potentially, I may take my life. That's a hard topic for Black men to talk about. But, in the past decade, Black male suicide rates have gone up 60%. So it's something that's prevalent in our community. But again, much like mental health, I think it has even a worse stigma, where the depression and anxiety gets you to a point where you don't want to be strong anymore and you don't want to persevere. So that's often where I meet clients at that are struggling with their emotions, struggling to regulate their emotions. Is, yeah, man, I didn't know what else to do. I'm the last resort. I'm when they break the glass and they said, I need some help. And for me, I try to encourage them that that's the ultimate sign of maturity. That's the ultimate sign of self-love, is when you say, I don't got it. Right. And I think that's why us being in this space as Black men and as Black male therapists is because they don't see us and they don't feel seen in this mental health space. So giving them the opportunity to, have someone, again, we talk about a lot about culturally competent, somebody who gets it. And not that every experience is the same. It's like Black culture isn't a monolith, but there's just certain experiences that are easily, you're more easily ready to relate to. I just try to meet people where they're at, but I'm glad that we're talking about it, so we can kind of brainstorm and talk about our experiences, because I learned just as much from my clients as I hope they learn from me. And so it's been a blessing to be in this space. It's deeply encouraging. But as far as Black men and mental health, yeah, we definitely got some work to do.
Man, just unpacking everything that you just said there, specifically around how us Black men, a lot of times we have to have this facade or this mask that we always have it, that we can't have an off day. And for us to even think about or even have the idea of having an off day, we're automatically weak. I pulled something up, and it's from Rahita Walker, Dr. Rahita Walker, who's the professor of psychology and director of the University of Houston's Culture, Risk, and Resilience Lab. And she said, anything that is perceived as mental health related is taboo in the Black community. To further complicate things, getting help is seen as a weakness. So folks press on even when they are struggling. Doing so is part of a cultural legacy of survival in the face of brutal circumstances. And when I read that, I was just thinking about everything that you said, because that is our experience oftentimes, is we don't have somebody to go to in most cases that's culturally competent and that can relate with us. So when you're like, yeah, but when you get in the room and they're already trying to dap you up, because it's almost like, dang, I've been looking for this for years, especially having a male who is trained and is a professional in this space. So I feel you on that. As far as, when you see clients and when you see men that are struggling with anxiety, depression, or suicidal ideation, I think it's important to give the listeners and viewers kind of some symptoms of what you see, because a lot of times in families or relationships, we don't always know what that looks like.
Yeah.
So can you provide some context on what those symptoms may look like for those out there that's like, yeah, my partner doesn't really suffer from these things, but they actually do?
Yeah. I think, I'm not going to get into like the DSM type stuff, but as far as some telltale signs, if you notice that your partner is kind of lethargic and low energy, and those are things that you've seen for more than 2 weeks or maybe a month, that they're just not themselves. We hear a lot things that you once found pleasure in. That's a good sign. If you like going to the gym or like watching sports or playing pool, whatever the case may be, if those things no longer interest you, or you have a problem getting out of bed, or you just feel like this immense weight on your shoulders, that sense of dread, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think it's kind of hard because, as you said off air, depression and anxiety go hand in hand. And I think people try to pinpoint it. They want a diagnosis when they come in. What is it? And the thing about, depression and anxiety, although there may be symptoms, it's going to be different for everybody. So I think the important thing is be aware of the symptoms, but also, check in with yourself. And that's an exercise I really try to help men especially do, is how do you feel? We're familiar with it, the emotional wheel. When I first saw that thing, man, I'm like, silly, man, I know how I feel. Then I started going through the words. I was like, oh, this disappointment. Okay.
Right.
Like enraged. I'm like, okay, this provides some deeper descriptions. And so I think even exercises and things like that, they feel kind of elementary, but I'm gonna be honest, man, for a lot of men, the emotional competence, it's not there. You know what I mean? A lot of us have been emotionally stifled because we focused on being strong so long that most men, the thing that they can articulate the most is anger. And I think if you're angry all the time, there's a lot of despair. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear and stuff there. So anger and fear and things like that, I think, are emotions that we're wary of. But there's just so many other things that when you begin to unpack yourself, you're like, okay, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed because I expected more from myself. I expected more from my father. I expected more from my mom. I expected, more from my partner. You know what I mean? I want more from my kids. And so experiences like that, in addition to the symptoms, but really tracking where you are emotionally so you can pinpoint, because I don't often label it. It's rare that I tell someone that they're depressed, because I think we live in a generation where there's so many hot buzzwords like depression and anxiety and narcissism and all these things like that, to where it's like, I mean, that don't seem like a clinical definition, but I'm sure TikTok agrees with you. I let them label it. So they may call anxiety depression, and we just kind of go from there, because I think the language is important, and we can do some psychoeducation and things like that. But I don't try to put ideas in people's head, because I feel like we're a fear mongering culture sometimes, and I don't want to promote fear in therapy or pathology and telling people, oh yeah, this is what's wrong with you. You need medication. You need therapy. You need to be here. I'm like, it's just a conversation. I just want to get to know you. And then after you build that rapport, then we can tackle some things where I might say, I think you may be struggling with depression, but that's not something I come out the gate, labeling people. I allow them to use their own language and really gain context, because it's more so about their lifestyle and what they're going through. And if some of those things are there where they're just like, yeah, man, I feel like I lost hope. I'm like, okay, we might need to talk about, getting some extra help and things like that. So I think the symptoms are important, but they look different for everybody.
And that's the thing, man. I think for our community, things are pathologized, or even some things as far as, oh well, he's having behavioral issues, so there's a problem. Let's put him on ADHD medication or this or that. And so when you start hearing the experiences of many of us, it's like, why would we want to talk to anybody?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're like, oh, something's wrong with your kid. He's acting up in class. We need to give him medicine because, and this is generally speaking, but sometimes in the classroom, it's like, what do we need to do to get this child to be quiet so we can teach the rest of the class?
Mm-hmm.
And so you start seeing children way behind their peers, because it's like, did you meet that child or that young boy where he was at? Did you take into account the cultural aspect, or did you take into account what is going on at home? And so when we start saying, like you said, throwing around these terms, that's scary. That's, like you said, fear mongering. But the other thing I want to mention too, because I want to drive this home for the audience and our viewers that are tuning into this. So suicide remains the second leading cause of death among all adolescents. And this is from Suicide 2022. And research shows that Black and African American children under the age of 13 die by suicide at nearly double the rate of white children. That's from Patani 2021. So when you start taking into consideration, we are nearly double the rate of white children, you start thinking, what's the issue? What's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
There are not many of us in the mental health space. There's not a lot of sometimes culturally competent therapists that we feel safe going, because historically it's like, why do I want to trust this clinician? And I think that kind of takes us into our other question. So going over to Jay Lee, because we can kind of tie this together from your experiences. So as a Black therapist, Black male therapist who has navigated your own mental health challenges, can you share some of the experiences or emotions that you went through during those times?
Yeah, for sure. Shout out the young King Nelson for doing that question damn sure justice. And the whole time I'm just thinking about just the similarities between number one and number two. For me, it was a tough journey of how I even got into community college later in my life. It was one of the hardest things I ever did for the reasons we talked about in question one. Representation matters. I want to say that first. So fast forward to now, this is the first time in grad school where I have two, but had a Black professor. And I just think that says a lot. But going into junior college and becoming a psych major, it was difficult, just in general, the culture shock and being around different people. I didn't see many people who looked like me, especially in this space. I doubted myself, that people call it imposter syndrome. And, I guess you could call it that. But for me, it was just not even confidence, coming from a community where I didn't see anyone succeed in these spaces. I didn't believe in myself. We threw around words like self-love and things like that. I didn't have any. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't have any self-love. But once I started on that journey, and what I like to speak to anyone about is the power of reading. And what that for me became communication. I would talk to myself. I read a book that told me to talk to myself in the mirror daily, and I did so. And that's how I started to reprogram my thoughts. And as I continue to go forward, I gained more confidence and more confidence. And I'm sure we all feel these similar ways. I wanted to be the therapist that I never had, that I thought that I could contribute. So I became my own, read different literatures, obviously some that subscribe from school, and then others that I would hear about. And I would get in that mirror and I would talk to myself, kind of like what Nelson was saying with the will, emotional will. I would ask myself how I'm feeling and I would respond. And I would kind of get it out and start to learn, why did I do this? Why do I do that? Just starting to understand this system of myself more. And I just started to progress. And I still battle with it, to be honest, not even from this educational space, but just in life in general. We all go through ups and downs. And we talked about it the first time. As Black men, especially ones who come from underprivileged communities, we're taught to be strong, told to be strong. I was raised by a single parent mother, 20-year-old mother with 2 children. She would, whoop me and my brother if we showed any sign of weakness. So that became my badge of honor. I thought that was being strong, but as I continued to grow, I learned that being transparent and vulnerable was actually the strength that I needed, and being able to articulate myself. And one of the things that I'm excited about and I look forward to when I'm around people is sharing that, because one of my superpowers is that I allow people, or I invite people to be themselves around me. So I'm always going to be true to who I am. And I think it gives people that sense of confidence as well, that you don't have to wear your mask or put on in front of me. I want you to be who you are authentically, because I'm going to be the same, and I'm going to, not judge you for that. I think that, life in general can throw you curveballs, ups and downs, and I have my share of it. And I think that I'm a spiritual man, so that's got me to this space. I believe that this is my purpose, to communicate my transition into a new being, a new person. And as I continue to do so, I love to sit down with anyone and everyone and try to help them along with their journey as well.
Man, I can't help but to think about what you just said, and also you being a father now. And that's something many of us men sometimes is like, where's the father one-on-one book? How do we do this? How have your experiences shaped how you show up for your children? Because I mean, we all know, we've seen children, they go through so many different ups and downs. And as a parent, as somebody who may be around children or may not have it, like Nelson was saying, may not have it on a specific day, how do you show up and provide your kids with some of the tools that you learned from many of your experiences?
Just honesty. Me and my partner, we go back and forth honestly about this, because I'm just honest, of course within, context, and, but I'm pretty honest. I don't believe in lying to my kids. I feel like I was lied to so much as a child that, I try to basically do and teach them the things that I felt like I needed to learn or should have learned, and the things that I did learn, the good, the bad, the ugly, if you will. But it was the best thing that happened to me. I say that my children saved me. My first son is not my biological. He was 3 when I met him, but I fell in love with him. He didn't have a father, and I saw so many similarities, excuse me. And I believe that I could help him in his journey. And we've been rocking ever since. He's my son and I'm his father. And then my youngest, which is 3, he's my biological. And I think I mentioned this to you men before, that he has a medical condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, where he has brittle bones. So he's had surgeries. It was one of the hardest things that I ever went through in my life. And I've been through a lot, but it strengthened me at the same time. I believe in, things happen for a reason. And he's 3 now. He's a brilliant little boy, very active little boy. So I'll share the story. One time, many times, but this one time I was crying, just, stages of grief, going through it, why me, blah, blah, blah. And a good friend of mine says, look at your son right now. He was playing, he was laughing, he had his cast on, he just got surgery. And I don't want to project my feelings on him, so I have to be strong for him because he's strong. This is his reality. Unfortunately, I can't be selfish. This is his journey, and this is going to strengthen him and prepare him for life, for his own self. It was the best thing that happened to me. It was the best thing to happen to me. It taught me that life is not in my control. The only somewhat thing I can control is my own. And I try to wake up every day and do that. I try to be the best man I could be every day. I wake up, my feet hit the floor, I beat my chest, as my name is Joshua Brisman, but people call me a lion. So I roar every morning. I get in that mirror and I give myself the self-talk I need. And let's get it. Let's be great today. And that's my routine every morning because I know I have people looking at me and depending on me.
I'm glad you mentioned something about, I mean, I know you mentioned it a couple times, just self-love. I like to think about this from the context of therapy, because a lot of times, just in general, people think, let me go to therapy. I'll go one time, two times, but not do anything else outside of going to therapy. And I think it's so
Right.
important to be able to learn how to give yourself self-love, because at the end of the day, we can't depend on everybody to be everything for us. So some of those voids
Absolutely.
we have to be able to fill on our own, but it has to come from an authentic space. And by the sounds of you, just like blowing yourself a kiss, roaring in the morning, just giving yourself this confidence and this energy that you need to show up for your kids. The other thing that I want to mention too is, you mentioned crying, and Nelson mentioned it earlier, that feelings wheel. So we have maybe one or two feelings as men in general we feel,
Mm-hmm.
and for you to just be authentic and brave to share that, because I think as men and or dads, it's like emotions, I can't show that in front of my kids, but that vulnerability and that honesty that you mentioned probably goes a long way with your kids and your partner. So that is like, when we think about mental health and therapy, it is, in my opinion, it's got to be a holistic thing. It can't be just one thing. Now, I will say going to therapy is the first step, which can help you implement a holistic approach to mental care, mental health, wellness. But just doing one thing, it's kind of like, if you play baseball and you show up to the game with only a bat, well, where's your glove? If you're playing outfield, you need a glove too. Where's your coach? So it's a community thing. Switching gears, and want to hit on the historical context of mental health, especially in the Black community. So we're going to go over to Dre. And how does historical trauma, such as the legacy of slavery and systemic racism, contribute to mental health struggles in the Black communities, especially in the context of natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina? And before you answer this, just to give our audience some context, I know you've had experiences, or you've had family that went through the struggles of Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath. So again, the question is, how does historical trauma, such as legacy of slavery and systemic racism, contribute to the mental health struggles of Black communities, especially in the context of natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. When I think about it, the first thing I that comes to mind is stability, right? Particularly for myself, I went to the same school up until like kindergarten to fifth grade. When Katrina hit in August of 2005, like that totally shifted. And that stability that was there was no longer there. I ended up switching schools for at least like 7 straight years, until from fifth grade until, my senior year of high school. And kind of with that, I went from private to public schools. And to also add some context, with this shifting of stability, there was also a shifting of family roles. So my dad, and Nelson mentioned this before when he talked about depression and anxiety. My dad was, deemed the protector and the provider of our family. He was a business owner, and he went from not having a business to working a sales job to working within the medical system to working in to practically not working at all and being on disability. So that was a real struggle for him, because as a man, his identity was wrapped up around protecting and providing. And when my mom became the breadwinner of our family, that was a process where I'm not really sure we really delved into, right? As far as like, what does this look for you right now? How does this kind of shape how you are and, how you move, in the future? So, so realistically, we went from like having a lot to having very little to kind of trying to manage what we have at all. And so that was a really difficult thing. And I think just as a Black person in general, like there's so many systemic barriers, so many like obstacles like attached to hitting a certain level of success. So when you are a business owner and when you kind of reach this like this milestone and you kind of get knocked down, it's super hard to get right back up again. Especially we kind of have like these bars steadily move, so you kind of hear like, okay, graduate college, undergrad, you get a BA, like you'll be successful, get a master's, successful, PhD. All right, you're in there, but now it's like the bar is like steadily getting moved for us. So and it really can be discouraging as well.
I want to go back to because there's two parts in there. First one I want to come back to is going through Hurricane Katrina. And can you provide context on, did you see other classmates or other peers around you suffer from mental health issues? And if so, how did you see that either impact you or peers or even their families?
Yeah. I think for myself, I really was disconnected from a lot of that support that I built, from kindergarten to the fifth grade. I didn't readily have contact with anybody. And so when I would go into these different spaces, like I would have to, find a friend, find somebody who I can connect to, not knowing that I've just been displaced from my home. I may not see my cousins for a while. I may not see different family members for a while. So I think that really took a toll on me mentally because it's hard moving. It's hard having that happen at the age that it did for myself because I was, like I said, I was in the fifth grade and maybe I'm around like 11 or 12 around that time. I'm not really having a full grasp, but as an adult, as a man, like, currently today I'm reflecting, I say, oh, this is why I kind of felt a bit of loneliness here. Here's why maybe I've isolated myself. Here's why where like I didn't really, really have the means to know what it was I was really dealing with. I think as I go back to New Orleans, like now, to hit your question of like, do I see mental health within, people from that time? It's interesting because prior to me going to my master's program, I worked at a school, at a charter school. And whenever it would rain, these kids would have like tremendous, like, kind of like, oh, I don't want anything to happen to me. Like, I'm kind of scared. And, during this time, like, they weren't, alive during Katrina, but maybe their parents were, and they were, there, like, in the womb. So it's kind of like they have these same responses as like adults and the elders, like, who actually lived through it. So it's kind of like that transmission of like anxiety and whatever you want to label it and call it. So I see it today. It just comes in a different form.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that as far as like these kids weren't even born, they were still in the womb. And I believe there's a study out there. I believe they did a study on rats and they would have the rats smell lavender and then they would shock the rats. And I think they saw kind of symptoms of anxiety or fear of when they would expose I think it was like 2, 3, 4 generations down, they would expose the rats to lavender and they would still have like this physiological response in fear of that the shock would come. And so like when we start thinking about our community in the historical context of mental health issues, and you start, you think about slavery and many of the injustices that have happened in our history, we've been through a lot. We have a lot of these traumatic experiences that have maybe are even in our DNA and we weren't even born for them. And so when we start talking about the importance of having this conversation for our community, this is what we mean. We talked about anxiety and depression, how this shows up sometimes. We've talked about how giving self-love, learning how to give self-love and showing up as a dad. And then also you, Dre, with talking about the historical context with going through Hurricane Katrina and moving schools and sometimes feeling isolated or just not having that true connection. There's that other piece in there, though, that you mentioned when your father went from, I believe you mentioned, went from business owner to, I believe, sales. I may be getting that wrong. I'd imagine that has such an impact for men because a lot of us, generally speaking, have the mindset, and some of society has taught us this. We show up from a monetary standpoint, financially providing for our family and protecting our family. So whether we need to fight or whatever, I want to go over to Nelson. What are your thoughts on that as far as, how men show up? And, we kind of have this mentality sometimes that we can only show up with our wallets or, being able to fight or protect our family.
Yeah, I think in a straightforward answer, that's patriarchy. So the thing is, as a Black man, I think you're spoon fed the same things as what your masculinity is attached to as far as provision, but you aren't offered the same opportunities, right? So we just talked about the historical trauma, and that comes with a lot of prejudice and a lot of racism and things like that, to where you're held to the same standards as a man, right? Like you need to be a provider, you need to be a protector, but who protects you? Who provided for you? For the boys and girls and kids that didn't grow up with seeing that from men, where do you learn that? I see that not only for men but for women as well, to where we want something that sometimes we've never seen. So when you're trying to be that example, but there isn't the mentorship, because I think it goes further than finding a therapist or as Jay Lee mentioned, a teacher or stuff like that, looking for people in those positions. A lot of us are still searching for a parent, for a mentor, for somebody to give us that guidance as an adult, to where it's a lot of firsts, you know what I mean? In the room, it's a lot of firsts on this chat. And so it's hard, and it's an experience we don't talk about enough, where it's like, I would love to be a man. You know what I mean? I would love to provide for the next 3 generations. And as Dre said, we've chosen to pursue that via our education. But I got my bachelor's in psychology, and a 6-figure job didn't come. You know what I mean? To where you just end up, kind of being in transition. And I think it's being honest with ourselves. One, that it's like, I'm still human, even if I don't hit some of these milestones that the world has made out for me and things like that. But also being able to be expressive about when we do feel like we're falling short, and communicating that and connecting with others. Because I know for a lot of men, if they can't provide before their partner, before their kids, look down on them, they feel that shame and they feel that guilt, and they isolate and they shut down. Just, bracing yourself for impact that sometimes doesn't come, because, in my experience, for a lot of us, we saw parents and aunties and uncles where they went through the struggle, but they managed to somehow stay together, regardless of provision, regardless of opportunities, regardless of education. And there's nothing wrong with clinging to those things, because I think to a certain degree, it does make, I guess, a middle-class lifestyle or financial security a little easier, but it is in no way, shape, or form a guarantee. So I think when we talk about some of these pressures as a man, the thing that we need to focus on oftentimes is the connection. And then 2, there's a lot of link to provision, But it's also too, as far as finding a partner, it's like, well, if I become a provider, I can have this type of woman and this type of lifestyle and this type of car. And there's oftentimes isn't very much thought that goes into, hey, bro, why you want that? What does that have to do with you? Because next thing I have to complain is like, oh, she want too much and the kids in private school and you know what I mean? And it's like, that's what you said you wanted. You know what I mean? This comes with that lifestyle. And that's a big part of lifestyle inflation, is that, we're so busy trying to pay for our masculinity that it's just, if you show up as a man and show up as you, the lifestyle that happens all around that, in terms of your friends, in terms of your partnership, in terms of your family, somehow it works itself out because you're where you're supposed to be. So I get the social media stuff. I get the biblical stuff. I get all these different messages as far as masculinity and what manhood is supposed to be. But again, those expectations are there, but we aren't often given the resources and the support. We don't often get the same privilege to all of a sudden just, I'm able to readily benefit from masculinity. It's like, patriarchy doesn't work like that for me. Although, there's people that think it does. Oh, you're a man. It's like, I'm a Black man. Make sure you say that part first. So just giving yourself that grace and being honest with yourself about what kind of man you are. There are sensitive men. There are hardworking men. There are men that put their head down. There are men that, need to take a break. But you get to tap in with yourself and figure out what type of man you want to be. And I think that self-love that Jay Lee talked about, that happens when you accept yourself, right? When instead of, responding to every little critique of men, like, notice LeBron don't ever really respond to critics. He just been doing his thing for 20 years. You just kind of hit a groove where you like, I'm me, and everything that's for me will happen as long as I'm authentic to myself. So I think we'll see a lot of those pressures and even as far as mental health, those struggles kind of dissipate when we learn to accept ourselves. But as long as your ears are wide open and you don't know how to have that discernment and say, that may not have anything to do with me and where I'm at in my journey right now, then, you are going to struggle. But I think getting to a space where we can say, brother, you all right with where you're at, your love for who you are and where you are in life. And if you want more, I hope you're able to have the support and not just the work ethic to get there, but you'd have the grace and stuff when you fail as well. So, I get it. I get where all those things come from, but I think sometimes we got to be real about it. And that starts with being real with ourselves as well.
Being real with ourselves. And that part you mentioned, sometimes we spend too much time trying to buy our masculinity. That right there is, man, that could be the highlight of this podcast, especially when we tie that in with mental health. So a lot of times us men try to use money to mask many of the things that we go through. It's like, hey man, I got this car. Like, what's up? I'm good. Got these Jordans, got this, got that. But it's like, what do you got in between your ears? And if it's unstable, what does all of that even mean? And again, going back to Jay Lee, yes, starting with that self-love piece, like you said, Nelson, starting with that self-love, when we can just kind of like put that to the side and just show up as us, but also being in spaces that cultivate that type of safety. That's why I enjoy talking to the three of y'all, because it's like, hey, we got the similar experiences. We are here as us, and we get it. It's not easy. This is hard. And the other part you said, no, yes, I'm a male, but make sure you put I'm a Black male in front of that, because that's the reality. There might be privileges here and there, but the reality is, when we walk into a store, we walk into a classroom, that's the first thing people see. So we can't get rid of that. We'll never get rid of that. So talking about mental health and having this real conversation about things we experience is so important, because at the end of the day, if we are not showing up for ourselves, how can we show up for other people? If we don't have water in our cups, how can we expect to pour into somebody else's cup? It just can't happen. The last piece I'll add to this is I'm just so appreciative that, we've been able to have this opportunity to cultivate a space and have this conversation. I think you may have hit on it, Nelson, just as far as making the effort, maybe you alluded to it, but making the effort to stay connected with one another within our community, because I think it is something that oftentimes, at least in my experiences, men just was like, we don't keep in contact with each other. And so it's almost like this individual mindset of like, hey man, I'm over here doing my thing. I'm busy. I don't got time for anything. But it's like part of our psychology is needing to be in tune with other people, or community, and talking with other people. We're social beings. We need those things. But to show up in a space that's safe, and knowing that, you know, I'm not in competition with you, you're not in competition with him. It's like, we're here. This is who we are. So transitioning over to, I want to go over to Jay Lee with this. In your experiences, what strategies or messaging have been effective in encouraging Black men to prioritize their mental health and seek out therapy?
Once again, just being honest about who I am. I think that my story is powerful. I think I mentioned to you all I'm writing a book currently, but I think just representing our culture the right way. When I'm around these young individuals, I try to go back to communities where I came from or similar to the ones that I come from and talk. I think Nelson mentioned too, being relatable. I say I've done, heard, and seen it all, so you can't really miss me. So when I'm around these kids, I still, at times dress like I'm from the culture. I try to represent. So I invite these kids into my space, and I kind of, resemble the culture in a sense, but I also try to show them that growth is a part of life, evolving is a part of life, and you don't want to stay the same. I have so many thoughts going through my head just after everything that was said, especially the conversation we were just having about the Black man. Systemically, we know, like I said, I grew up, I'm an 80s, early 90s baby. So I grew up when crack was huge, man. The Black fathers was taken out of the home. So we didn't have representation of a Black father. All we knew was what we saw on TV, which was basketball players with the bread, rappers with the money. So they perpetuated that flamboyant lifestyle. So people in the hood wanted that. So that's what we thought, and we took on that approach, and we got it by any means, which was usually illegal ways. I didn't have any real, I don't want to say real men, but just the idea of a man can be multifaceted. I think Nelson kind of touched on that. It's not just a provider being hard or being weak or those things, because the male figure that I had was a provider, but he wasn't present. And I think having children, man, my kids spell love Time, and being able to provide that's more valuable.
I appreciate the part you mentioned as far as like sometimes you go back to your community and you still sometimes dress like the culture. And that ties into, because you mentioned athletes, and that is something that I have a lot of interest in, is athlete mental health. And you're starting to see more and more athletes come out and speaking about their own mental health struggles. And I think that's one way that we can continue opening up spaces and having open conversations about mental health, is seeing, at least in our community, our community oftentimes looks up to the entertainers, the athletes, for guidance or a way out. I want to take that question even deeper, going over to Dre. How can we continue to normalize help seeking behaviors within our communities?
I think it's just what we're doing now. We're talking about it. Being in spaces where people are talking about it. Just like communicating it to anybody that we're kind of in connection to, and hoping that, like, they're taking these messages that we're saying and they're passing it to somebody that's in there that they consider a part of like their social system. Um, Really in all, I think that's one of the biggest parts, like just having these conversations. But it really does start with kind of feeling safe to have these conversations, kind of, opening the door to, like, kind of getting the help that, people need, especially Black men need. My mind is definitely running right now. I think I didn't even hear about mental health till I think I hit my senior year of not high school, but college. And I only really recognized it because I was at my wit's end. I was like, hey, I can't even go to grad school. Like I'm done. I can't look at no type of assignment. I'm shutting my computer down for a year, which I literally did. And it was until like I got in the presence of other people, especially other men, and worked for like a pretty great organization where I first started to hear these topics. And mind you, like I was 20, 22, 23 at the time. And this could have really helped me develop like my sense of self, like outside of these constructions, outside of these labels, to really kind of figure out like who I really am. I think I'm still in that journey like right now. Who am I? Who am I like outside outside of the education, outside of BA to MA, all of these things that I have, like who really am I? I think I'm still identifying those pieces of myself. So I think one of the first steps, but most important steps is to have these conversations, man. I don't even really honestly kind of dive too deep into this because I don't even have like a group of men I normally talk to. Y'all are probably the first group where I'm openly talking about mental health with. I might have a one-on-one conversations with one of my homies like outside of this space, but other than that, I'm not really talking about it as much.
That vulnerability piece right there of saying you didn't know about it until senior in college, put up that notebook for a year. You had it, you were done with it. And this is why these are powerful, because by you sharing that, whoever may be listening or watching can be like, you know what, dang, I had that same experience, but that's what you call anxiety, or dang, that's what you call depression. Oh man, I didn't even know that. And so when you start sharing the experiences, like even for me, I was in denial for so long about anxiety and depression. I was like, man, no, I've never experienced it, but I'm sure that would be tough for somebody. And then once I started learning about anxiety and depression, I'm like, oh dang, you can't unsee it. Once you see it in yourself, you can't unsee it. And so I think for us having this conversation, I'm just so appreciative that we were able to connect out in San Diego and just link up. Because how many spaces provide itself for that type of opportunity? Not too many. Wrapping up this conversation, my mind is overstimulated because I'm just like, we could probably continue this conversation for another 3 hours, but I just want to take the time to give each of y'all flowers right now. Nelson, man, I appreciate just your thoughts and how you worded things, and just you bring this energy, and you're just real. You bring it and you're like, hey man, like this is me. This is authentic me. Laugh, joke, but I also love your depth. So I appreciate you. Jay Lee, I appreciate you just always being authentic, just always being you, but always bringing that wisdom to our conversations, man. It really is enlightening. When we met a half a year ago, I'm just like, man, this dude's cool. Like and like you said, you open up spaces for people just to be them. That's what I appreciate. Andre, giving you your flowers, being vulnerable on here, talking about some of your experiences. And like you said, you didn't know about mental health until you were a senior in college. To openly express that and openly express some of the things that you went through, that's a testament to you. To me, this is like a nice little brotherhood, so that we can go back and forth and converse with one another, especially as professionals in this space, but even more so as brothers. I think having each one of y'all as friends, colleagues, it is so meaningful to me. And I just appreciate each and every one of y'all for providing just the authentic you and speaking from your experiences. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and just express what it is to not only be a Black man, but what it means to have anxiety, have depression. Wrapping up things, if you're listening to Coats and Conversation on YouTube, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to be the first one to catch the next episode coming out. Be sure to follow Coats and Conversation on Apple, Spotify, and on Instagram to catch some of the powerful conversations that we have. And lastly, if you know somebody that is struggling with mental health, be sure to share this conversation with them. One of the main big resources that you can share also with other people is the 988 chat lifeline. You can call 988 You can text 988, or you can go to 988lifeline.org/chat. Mental health in the Black community, especially for us Black men, is something that we need to start having more and more of these conversations. So many of us struggle from these things, these everyday life things, but it manifests as anger and we don't know. I will say anger, or expressing anger on a day-to-day basis where it's disruptive or dysfunctional in your relationships, is not healthy. I'm going to say that one more time. Displaying anger on a day-to-day basis where it's disruptive or it affects your family or the relationships that you have is not normal. Beginning to have that self-awareness and being able to ask yourself the question, as Andre said earlier, who am I? What relationships do you want to have in your life? What do you want your legacy to be? Again, if you know somebody that is struggling mentally, be sure to share this podcast episode with them. Again, be sure to like and subscribe to Coats in Conversation. And until next time, we'll chat soon.